The first thing I want to tell you is not about me, it is about my mother's hands. She had the kind of hands that never stopped. Wide palms, short nails, the skin along her knuckles permanently roughened from cold water and dish soap, and the particular dryness that comes from a life spent doing things. I used to watch those hands when I was small. The way they moved through tasks without hesitation, without wasted motion, as if they had made a private agreement with the work a long time ago and had simply been honoring it ever since. There was something deeply reassuring about that. The certainty of her hands, the way they always seemed to know exactly what came next. It took me until I was 31 years old, sitting across from a therapist in a small office in Knoxville with a box of tissues on the table between us, to understand that I had been reading my mother's hands my entire life, because her face was the one thing she never let me read at all. My name is Claire, and this is Leaving Plain. I grew up inside a conservative old colony Mennonite community in rural northern Indiana, the kind of place where the roads go flat and straight for miles, and the sky is so wide in every direction that it can feel, depending on your age and what is happening inside you, either like freedom or like exposure. I left when I was 28. This channel is where I say the things that were never supposed to be said, which in the community I came from meant almost everything I actually thought and felt and needed. If you are new here and you want the unvarnished truth about that kind of life from someone who lived it from the inside, please subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. I am still near the beginning of what I have to tell you, but today I want to talk about my mother. I have spent 3 years on this channel talking about the community, the structure, the rules written and unwritten, the way a world can be built around a person so completely that they stop being able to see its walls. All of that needed to be said. But underneath all of it, running quieter and deeper, is a story I have been circling without ever fully entering. The story of a woman who knew, who saw, who carried something private and unspoken for 40 years inside a life she had built in the only way her world had taught her to build one. And what I now believe she understood about the life she was quietly handing to me. I need to start somewhere specific. So I will start with a Tuesday in March when I was 16 years old. It was one of those late Indiana winter mornings when the ground is still frozen underneath, but the air has a loosening to it, a softening at the edges that hasn't fully arrived but is close enough to feel. I was in the kitchen helping my mother prepare the midday meal. We worked alongside each other the way we always did, without much conversation, in the easy parallel rhythm of two people who had shared a kitchen long enough that language was mostly unnecessary. She was at the stove. I was at the table working through a pile of potatoes. The radio was on low. We were allowed a radio in our home, tuned exclusively to Christian programming and the local farm report, and the sound of it was part of the texture of those mornings, a familiar background hum. But that Tuesday, something shifted in the programming, a longer segment than usual. A woman being interviewed whose voice had a quality I had not heard before on that station. Measured, but not flat. Composed, but with something underneath the composure that you could feel without being able to name. She was talking about growing up in a restricted religious community, about leaving it at 25, about the specific experience of building a life outside everything she had been raised to believe was the only safe life there was. I stopped moving. I did not put down the potato in my hands. I just stopped and listened. My mother kept stirring at the stove. Neither of us said anything, and then, without turning around, without any change in the rhythm of what her hands were doing, she reached out and turned the radio off. The silence that followed was so specific, I can still locate it in my body if I try. She did not tell me to forget what I had heard. She did not say anything about it at all. She simply removed it the way you remove something that has the potential to disturb, and she kept working, and the morning continued. I did not mention it, but I did not forget it either. I stored it in the same place I was learning to store everything that didn't have a category in the life I was living. The small, quiet archive building itself in the back of my mind without my full permission. It was not until I was 31 in that office in Knoxville that I finally understood. My mother had not turned off the radio to protect the community's values. She had turned it off to protect herself from having to respond to what I might have asked if she had left it on. That is a different thing entirely. And understanding the difference changed everything I thought I knew about the woman who raised me. My mother's name was Ruth. She was born the fourth of 7 children in the same northern Indiana community where she would eventually raise me, and her mother had been born not 20 miles from that same place. In every sense that matters, the community was the entire world, not a choice she had made. The water she had been swimming in since before she knew swimming required effort. She was married at 19 to my father, a quiet, careful man from a neighboring family with a good farm and a solid reputation in the church district. He was not unkind. He provided. He was present and dutiful in all the ways that counted inside that life. Whether she loved him in the private interior way I now understand love can work, I genuinely do not know. That was not a question I had the language to ask when I was young enough to have asked it, and by the time I had the language, I was no longer living in the same house. What I know is what I watched. I watched a woman who was extraordinarily competent and almost completely silent about what that competence cost her. I watched her manage a household of 7 people with organizational precision that in any other context would have been recognized as a significant skill. I watched her navigate every social complexity of the church community with a grace that I now understand was not natural ease but highly developed expertise. The expertise of a person who has spent decades learning how to move through a world without disturbing its surface. What I did not watch, what was never available for watching, was whatever was happening behind her eyes when the surface was still. There were moments. I collected them without knowing I was collecting them. The way children absorb things they cannot yet process. A particular stillness that came over her sometimes in the middle of ordinary tasks. A quality of suspension as if some part of her had briefly left the room. A look she gave my older sister once when my sister announced her engagement at 18. A look so fast and so quickly smoothed over that I almost missed it. A long pause before she answered my aunt's question at a church gathering when I was about 12 about whether she had ever wanted to do anything other than what she did. The pause. Then, this is what I was made for. Not this is what I chose. Not this is what I love. This is what I was made for. A statement about manufacture, about being built for a purpose. I was 12 and I heard contentment. I have thought about that sentence almost every week for 4 years. When I was 17, a girl I had known my whole life left the community, not quietly. She left the way young people sometimes leave closed worlds when they have been planning it alone for too long, abruptly, with more speed than preparation, in a way that left her family in a difficult position inside the church. We did not speak of her after. That was how it worked. Departure was absorbed the way a stone is absorbed into still water. A disruption, ripples, then stillness again, as if the stone had never existed. That evening after supper, I found myself alone in the kitchen with my mother. I was washing dishes. She was drying. I asked her because I was 17, and the question had been sitting in my chest since that morning, what she thought had made the girl leave. She was quiet for a moment, longer than the question required. Then she said, without looking at me, still working the dish towel around the rim of a glass, "Some people need more room than this life gives them." Said it the way you say something factual, observational, a description of a phenomenon rather than a judgment of it. And the question I wanted to ask next was already forming. The obvious, necessary question that any honest conversation would have walked directly toward. Do you? Have you? Is there room enough for you in this? I did not ask. She did not offer. We finished the dishes. The evening continued. I have replayed that moment more times than I can count. 2 people at the same sink, each carrying a version of the same knowledge, each waiting for the other to say the thing first, neither one able to be the one who said it. When I was 20, a young man from a respected family began showing formal interest. The process worked the way it always worked, through fathers, through supervised occasions, through the slow accumulation of approved time together. By the time our engagement was announced at a Sunday service, I had spent perhaps 11 evenings in the same room as this man, I knew his voice. I did not know him, and I was not certain, standing in my mother's kitchen the morning of our wedding, that I had been given the right kind of time to find him. 3 weeks before the announcement, my mother came to my room in the evening. This was unusual. She was not a person who came to sit on the edge of your bed and talk. She expressed love through what she prepared and arranged and managed, through presence rather than language. So when she came and sat in the chair near my window and folded her hands in her lap, I knew something was different. She asked me how I was feeling about everything. Those exact words. Not, are you happy? Not, is this what you want? How are you feeling about everything? A question with enough room in it to hold almost any answer. A question that could also be answered with almost nothing and still count as an answer. I told her I felt settled, that he was a good man, that I trusted my father's judgment. All true in their way, all the approved vocabulary, all the sentences that meant, in the language we shared, I am going to do this and I am not going to make it complicated. She listened. Her hands stayed folded. Then she said, "Marriage is long, Claire. Make sure you are going in with your eyes open." That was it. She stood up and smoothed the front of her dress and went back downstairs. I listened to her footsteps descend and lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling and tried to understand what had just happened in that room. I understand it now. What she'd come to do was as close as she had ever come, or would ever come, to telling me something true. She could not say, "I had doubts before my wedding, and no one asked about them, and I have carried those doubts for 30 years." She could not say, "This life has enough good in it to keep you and also cost you things you will not know you have lost until it is very late." She could not say, "I love you in a way that wants something more for you than wanting was permitted to want for me." The language was not available to her. The permission was not available to her. What she could do was come to my room, ask how I was feeling, leave the door open exactly one sentence wide, and then go back downstairs when I didn't walk through. The marriage lasted 8 years and produced 3 children I love, with a completeness that exists entirely apart from everything else I have to say about that chapter. I will not reduce those 8 years to a verdict. There was real warmth in places, real effort from both of us, and also a loneliness I could not name for most of the time I was living inside it because it was so familiar. It felt like atmosphere rather than condition, like weather rather than wound. What I will tell you, because it belongs to the story of my mother, is that for most of those 8 years, I watched her watch me. At family gatherings, at Sunday services, at the ordinary occasions that punctuate life inside a close community. I watched her watch my face when she thought I wasn't looking, with an expression I could not read in real time, but that I have since come to understand as something between vigilance and sorrow. The look of a person who knows something is in the room and is watching to see whether you're going to find it yourself. She never named it. We had the same conversation we had always had, the one conducted entirely in the language of practical things: children and weather and the garden and who needed what. And inside that language, which was also a form of love, we never once said the true thing. I left the community at 28. 3 weeks after I moved out and it was clear I was not returning, my mother called me. She was not comfortable on the phone. She treated it as a tool for specific functional information rather than a place where conversation could actually happen. So when I picked up and heard her voice, I knew something was different even before she spoke. We talked around the edges for a few minutes. The children, whether I had everything I needed, whether the apartment was warm enough, and then a pause, longer than anything the conversation required, and she said, "I thought about leaving once, when your youngest uncle was still small. I had a plan for about 3 weeks. I thought about it every day. I sat down on the floor of my apartment kitchen with the phone against my ear and did not speak for a long time." She did not explain what had stopped her. She did not describe what the plan had contained or what those 3 weeks had felt like from the inside. She placed that fact into the space between us after 30 years of silence and left it there. I asked her finally what had made her stay. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You, all of you. I didn't know what staying would cost you. I didn't know what going would cost you either. And I didn't know how to find out. That sentence has lived in me ever since. I have carried it into therapy and turned it over there. I have sat with the love in it, which is real, and with the grief in it, which is also real, and with what it reveals about the position my mother had been living inside for decades. A person who saw the door, who had measured the distance to it, who could not leave without taking apart something that other people were built into, who stayed, and who handed the life to her children not because she did not love them, but because she could not see another way to love them that didn't also cost them something devastating. I want to be careful here because it matters. My mother did not destroy my life. The version of this story where she is the villain is not the true version and not the one I am interested in telling. She gave me what she could. She loved me in the only language she had been given. She came to my room the night before my engagement and left a door open the width of one sentence. And I was 20 years old and did not know how to walk through it. And she could not walk through it for me, and neither of us knew then what that moment was going to cost us both. But the silence was not nothing. It was the most consequential thing that ever happened between us. Not because she was cruel, but because she knew and could not say it. And I grew up believing her stillness was peace when it was actually discipline. I grew up reading her hands because her face was what she had spent 40 years learning to make unreadable. And I learned that skill from her without knowing I was learning it. What I inherited from my mother was not just her recipes and her work ethic, but her most private survival strategy, the art of carrying something without letting it show. If you have been watching this channel for a while, if these stories have been reaching something you have kept in a quiet place, I want to ask you to subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications. This story in particular has taken me a long time to be ready to tell. There is more still to come. My mother and I talk on the phone every 2 weeks now. The conversations are still conducted mostly in the language of practical things, of children and weather, and what is growing in her garden. The community is still her life. I have stopped needing her to leave it. That need was its own kind of unfairness, the daughter demanding the mother complete a journey the daughter herself is still only partway through. But something has changed since that phone call. There is a quality in the silences between us now that is different from before. Less sealed, less like a locked door and more like a window, opened a small amount, enough to feel the air, enough to know it is there. She will say something sometimes, a small thing at the edge of something larger, and I will leave space around it, and neither of us will push past what the other is ready for. That restraint, which we are both practicing, is the closest thing to fluency we have found in a language neither of us learned anywhere. Last fall, she came to visit me. 3 days in my apartment, the longest she had ever stayed. On the second evening, we sat at my kitchen table after the children had gone to bed, and the apartment was quiet, and she looked around at the room, at the bookshelves and things on the walls and the ordinary evidence of the life I have built, and she was quiet in the particular way I have known my whole life. Then she said, "It looks like you here. This room looks like you." I did not cry until after she went to bed. She was not approving my choices. She was not withdrawing her faith or the life she had lived inside it. She was saying something more precise than any of that. She was saying, "I can see you. In this room, I can see who you actually are, and it is someone I recognize, and the recognition is not a sorrow." In the language we have been slowly learning to speak, across a distance that will probably never fully close, that is close to everything. If you grew up inside a family or a community where love was real and also limited, where the people who raised you were doing their sincere best, inside systems that shaped what their best could look like, I want to say something I needed someone to say to me for a long time. Both of those things can be true at the same time. The love can be real. The limitation can be real. The harm that came from the limitation can be real. None of those things cancels the others out. They exist together, and the work of adulthood, the particular work no one in communities like mine told me adulthood would require, is learning to hold all three without needing any one of them to disappear so the others can breathe. My mother could not tell me everything she knew. I am still learning what that cost us both. I am still finding in the rooms of my own life the places I sealed off and have not yet found the key back into. I am still catching myself making my face unreadable when someone I love asks how I am feeling about everything, and stopping and trying again and trying to answer with something that actually belongs to me. My mother turned off the radio when I was 16 because she could not afford to leave it on. I am 35 now, and I have the radio on constantly, and I am learning, slowly, that I am allowed to listen to what it says. I am allowed to hear the parts that are true and sit with them, and not reach over and turn them off to protect myself from having to respond. There is still so much I have not told you. Subscribe, like this video, turn on notifications, and stay with me. I will keep saying the things that were never meant to be said. Choose your freedoms carefully, and hold the people you love with both the truth of what they gave you and the truth of what they could not. It is possible to do both. I know because I am doing it imperfectly every week in a kitchen in Tennessee with the window open and the radio on.